Welcome to another episode of Moral Injury International. I'm Marty O'Connor here in Melbourne.
Hello, good evening, and I'm Leo Quinlan here in Ireland. And this evening we have a very important guest, but before I introduce her, just reminding people of what is moral injury, if you're looking at this for the first time. In layman terms and in a military sense, because tonight is going to be mostly chatting about military, moral injury occurs when soldiers suffer some traumatic experience and are later betrayed by higher authority. This happens in many, many armies in the world, as we have discovered over the last 4 years. And the unfortunate side effects of moral injury is the people who suffer from moral injury, they go silent. They don't talk about what they experience. They're suffering inside. It's like an injury to the soul. And it can lead to things like a broken relationship, broken marriages, inability to hold down a job, nervousness, depression, alcoholism, mental difficulties, and unfortunately, in some cases, suicide. Okay, so tonight to discuss what moral injury is, we're honored to have Dr. Bernadette Boss. And Bernadette is more than just a soldier. She was a brigadier in the army. A barrister, a magistrate, a coroner, and a commissioner. She is a beacon of hope and a symbol of compassionate leadership. Her legacy is defined not just by the service to her country, policies she has shaped, or the judgments she has passed, but by the countless lives she has touched and improved. In a world so often marred by indifference and injustice, Bernadette stands as a shining example of what it means to serve in public office with honor, integrity, and a deep sense of humanity. And we're very honored tonight to be able to speak with Dr. Bernadette Boss.
Dr. Bernadette, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Hello, Bernadette. I don't know whether to call you doctor, brigadier, or whatever, but look.
Just Bernadette is fine.
All right. Thank you very much. Bernadette, Marty and yourself are in Australia. I'm here in County Kerry in Ireland, and there's a big storm blowing outside at the moment. It's howling wind after a beautiful day. But anyway, let's go ahead. Bernadette, under the umbrella of moral injury, which this is all about, Moral Injury International, I understand from previous conversations we've had with you and what conversations more than that Marty have had with you, that you have a lot that you can tell us about moral injury, maybe from a personal basis, things you've observed, the work that you're doing. And basically, we just like to turn it over to you. Tell us what you'd like to say what you'd like to say about moral injury. And if we have any questions here and there, we'll just jump in and ask. And so basically, the floor is yours. So anything you'd like to talk about, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you very much for that. I guess everybody's favourite subject is themselves, isn't it? Really, unless they're being overly modest. But look, moral injury is a subject that I really was completely ignorant of as I suppose, as an issue until I was Interim National Commissioner for Defence and Veteran Suicide Prevention. And a very influential person in that space in Australia is Nikki Jameson. She unfortunately lost her son to suicide in the Australian military. And growing out of that, she developed an academic interest in what I suppose one could say is really the emerging subject of moral injury. Not that moral injury hasn't always been there. It's just like many things, we discover things. And moral injury, I believe, has really been confused with post-traumatic stress disorder and treated as such. And I think there's consensus in the academic community that has been the case, and now recognition that moral injury, in fact, is quite a separate issue and requires a separate approach. Really, it was talking to Leo and Martin, to both of you, when we first talked about this project, that I really identified personally with moral injury. I don't think I sort of approached it more in an academic sense before that. But it really led me to question some of my own life. I was born in the United Kingdom in 1964, which is now a very long time ago, although it only seems like a few years ago that I was 21. But anyway, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was an older person when he had my father. My father was the youngest of 10, good Catholic family. My grandfather had served in the Boer War and all the way through the First World War. He was a professional soldier, and he was born in 1880, which seems just, many lifetimes ago. It often strikes me as bizarre that my grandfather could have been born in 1880, but still. He suffered from as I understand it, he suffered terribly from his war service. Hardly surprisingly, he was in the infantry in the First World War. I mean, let alone what he experienced in the Boer War. But certainly we know of the horrors of the First World War, and it's well documented. And for him to have been and survived from 1914 to 1918 in an infantry regiment, one can only imagine the damage that must have done to him. Certainly he, as I understand it, and I've checked through as much as I can of his records online, he became essentially a drunkard. He was a Chelsea pensioner for a while and died in the 1950s. He married my grandmother, who was 20 years his junior, and as I say, had all of these children. I remember my uncle telling me stories of how badly my grandfather would beat my grandmother and land her in a very bad way. Things got so bad that eventually, even in that time, the children were taken away. So all 10 children were packed off separately in separate institutions. My father, in fact, was born in a workhouse. They were still in existence in 1925 in London, so he was born in a workhouse in London. And as I say, then the children were taken away, put into children's homes. So my father never had a proper role model growing up. And that created incredibly difficult circumstances. I think as an adult now, looking back, I can understand him more. But as a child, and even as an adult, I didn't like him at all. He was manipulative. He was an alcoholic himself. He wasn't violent as such. He was coercive control, I think we'd call it now. But as a child, I didn't recognize this. I didn't know what it was. I couldn't articulate why what was happening was wrong because it didn't have a label. Coercive control in the 1960s and 70s wasn't a thing. And I think that level of injustice I found deeply disturbing and probably knocked me off the tracks for a bit as well. And I think now I can probably label that, so firstly, I began to recognize as an adult, and particularly as a lawyer, recognize coercive control. I used to work in the areas of domestic violence, particularly sitting as a magistrate on the domestic violence lists. So I understood exactly what coercive control was by that stage. But as a child, I didn't know what it was. I knew that if I'd been beaten up, I could have reported it, and something may have been done. But I didn't know about coercive control. So I think from an early stage, I could probably identify that now, looking back, as a moral injury, so a personal moral injury. So, my paternal grandfather clearly had, I think we described that as PTSD, and we often see now in the literature and the lived experiences of people from traumatic military experience comes domestic violence. It's a common and well-documented thread we see now. But I think we also need to look carefully about that moral injury side of that comes down generationally. So my grandfather, PTSD, my father probably had PTSD from being beaten up and witnessing what he did before he was taken away. Probably suffered all sorts of traumas that it would be difficult now to really understand and identify, from having been taken away from his family, put in a children's home, separated from his siblings even, let alone his parents, having no good role model, and being, I think, a weak person as well. He had a weak personality. All of those things then created a father who was really inadequate and not fitted for that task. And that then led to me having problems really finding my own feet and establishing myself in my early life. Not helped by the fact that I'm dyslexic, so school was not a happy place for me. Life was difficult at home. I didn't do very well at school, but I was smart enough in some respects, but not very good in others. I'm functionally innumerate, to be perfectly honest. Maths, I do not have a maths. So I have a PhD in law from Sydney University, which is one of our most eminent universities, but I do not have a single qualification in maths, not one. I have a trail of academic failure in maths. So, when I came to go through school, I actually ended up going into nursing. Just to, I suppose, complete the picture from my mother's side. So my grandfather was born in Ireland. His father had been a soldier, gone to Ireland, married an Irish lady. My great-grandmother was Irish. Then my grandfather had been born in Ireland. He also joined the army. And as I said, been born in Cork. I thought that he had married an Irish lady, but I found out through ancestry.com that he'd actually married a lady from East Anglia. My mother's side of the family, my grandfather was born in Wexford and grew up there from a Irish farming community, Protestant Irish. So that became interesting when a little later, because my very fiercely Church of Ireland grandfather came to England after the Troubles. So after 1917, my great-grandmother removed her boys from Ireland, fearing, I think, that they'd get involved in things she didn't want them to be involved with. So they landed up in Liverpool, and my grandfather joined the army. Work wasn't particularly thorough around there, so he joined the army. He was a regular soldier between the wars, and then he was he became a metal specialist, and during the Second World War he was involved in a protected trade, so he couldn't be sent off to war, but he was in the Home Guard. He'd met my grandmother a little time before. She was from the just west of London, in that area in Berkshire. Two children. They were working class people, but my grandmother in particular really believed in education. So both my uncle and my mother, they basically scrimped and saved and sent them off to private school. And my mother went to a convent and did incredibly well. She was an amazingly intelligent woman. In this day and age would easily have become an academic, but really in the 40s, not so open to women to be able to do that. But because she had such a love of learning and academia, and the nuns were very persuasive, she converted to Catholicism. So there's my incredibly, and I'm sure Marty and Leo, you would appreciate this, Church of Ireland Irish person has daughter who now says, I'm going to convert to Catholicism. I think at one point she was even thinking about becoming a nun.
Wow.
I'm kind of glad I wasn't the fly on the wall for those conversations, but anyway.
You dodged that one.
I dodged that one. I dodged that argument. But in any event, she then sort of met and married my father, and my grandparents didn't like my father very much. He wasn't very honest either. He'd lied about his parents and lied about the fact that he said his parents had been killed in the war. He lied about his role in the Second World War. He was not a very nice person at all. But my mother, the converts to Catholicism are often more Catholic than the Catholics, and of course, she wouldn't dream of having married my father. That was it, till death they did part, which was what happened. But so my grandparents were good in that they didn't actively criticize my father in front of me or to me, but I was always aware of what was going on in the background. I was well aware that he wasn't, they didn't think much to him. So there was always that, there's this tension at home, and it wasn't a nice place to be. And if my father was drinking, you never knew what you were coming home to. So suffice to say that concentration on schoolwork was never a big thing for me, and I had no siblings to sort of let off steam with, or at the end of the day, I was a bit strange, I guess, and always one of the out crowd at school. There was always the misfits who hung around together, and I was one of those. So I guess that kind of also creates a sense of injustice as well. Why can't I be one of the crowd, sort of thing? So again, I identify that as being a degree of moral injury, of in that sort of not fitting in, not understanding why things aren't right. So really that kind of influence, looking back, I believe that sort of influenced my childhood, very much so. Because I wasn't concentrating at school, because everything was always sort of going on, everything was always an emotional turmoil, and you add puberty to that whole heady mixture, and suffice to say that school was not a good place for me. It was not a happy time, and I couldn't wait to get away from home. But because I wasn't really working or applying myself to work, and because I was dyslexic, I was therefore treated as being not very bright, but I could actually do stuff, and there was always this sort of level of, not actively, but sort of a flavour of disappointment over my academic lack of achievement at home. But in any event, I knew I wasn't going to do particularly well at my A levels, so I sort of looked at nursing, because I really wanted to help people. I've always wanted to help people. Service has always been something that really comes natural. I was mad keen for the army, but my grandfather was like, oh, no, you don't want to join the army. No, not as a woman. You don't want to join the army. And to be perfectly honest, the opportunities, I remember going to this, we had the school open day where the 3 services came along, but bearing in mind this is the British system, but they came along, and so I sort of, thought, I'll go and have a chat I don't have a chat to the Navy. So I wandered over to the Navy stand, and I said, hello, I'm interested. And they sort of, oh yes, yes, you're a woman. So, well, that's 10 out of 10 for observation. Oh yes, you can join the Wrens, but you essentially you wear a different, you wear blue instead of the gold bands for officer, and the men don't have to salute you, so and you can't go to sea. And I'm like, well, okay, well, there's not much point in being in the Navy if you can't go to sea, and they're going to treat women so differently. I'm not particularly interested in that. So I wander off to the Air Force, and they're like, oh yes, there's all these things available, and I throw in the Air Force, yes. And I'm like, okay, so what can I do? Oh, well, you're a woman. Okay, yes, great. 10 out of 10 for observation. Okay, what can I do? Oh, well, I suppose you can be an air traffic controller. Oh, okay, what do I need for that? Oh, yes, you have to be really good at maths. Okay, thanks, bye.
Yeah.
So I wander off to the army stand, but yet again the observation, oh, you're a woman. Gosh, these guys are incredibly good at picking gender in those days. But anyway, again, there wasn't a great deal to do, and you needed maths to get in as an officer. So they did suggest nursing. So I thought, oh wow, I really want to serve. I really want to be in the army, and I like looking after people. I'll go off and be a nurse. So I trained as a nurse, and it was one of the best things I did, I have to say. I guess so I left home at 18, went to London, trained at St Bartholomew's Hospital in London, and I really sort of took to it. You know, I was working in a team, which is what I really wanted to do. Loved working in that team environment, and I was helping people and doing something. And you know, you can really see that you were contributing, and even if it was that you were sort of holding somebody's hand as they died, you know, you're still doing something for people, you know, with people, and I enjoyed that teamwork. I enjoyed that sense of really helping people, and across all sorts of different environments, including my 2 months as psychiatric nurse training. So as part of my general nurse training, I didn't take the specialization of psychiatric training, but one of the things that I think, talk about moral injury, was taking patients for electroconvulsive therapy, people suffering from really crippling depression. You know, you have 240 volts put through your brain. I'm not convinced that that's the best way to do it. I found it, if you'll excuse the pun, really shocking. It just is not. I was flabbergasted that modern medicine still sort of. I believe it's still a treatment. I'm not too sure, to be perfectly honest, and if it works, I guess that's great. But I found it horrifying, I have to say. I used to dread, you know, having to go down to the ECG, with patients, the ECG, and sort of reassuring them and say, oh, you know, you'll feel much better after this. This is great. And then just watching it being done, it was, yeah. I don't think I'll take that horrible image to the grave. But again, I was shocked, as I say, bad use of words, perhaps, by that whole
Excuse
process.
the pun, but that's
Excuse
very
the pun.
serious. Yeah, but that is very
Yeah.
serious thing. Like, and that's again what you're alluding to, is that's moral injury, because you had to do something that you disagreed with personally. You know. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, please, Doctor.
No, absolutely. I did. I mean, I as I say, I'm not a doctor in that sense. A medical doctor. I don't. If it works, okay, I get that. But it's a horrible thing to see. It really is. I mean, of all the sorts of things that are done to get people better, that I think that's probably the worst thing I saw in that. But you get used to. I guess you kind of internalize that. They used to teach us in nursing, you know, you have to sort of have that separation, because you just can't cope if you take on everybody. You know, you've got 32 patients every day on a ward, and they're all suffering in some sense. You know, even when you do your obstetric training, I mean, I saw babies being born, and that was the point at which I thought probably I wasn't going to have one, because that's very unpleasant too.
I passed out with my 2 daughters for spirits. A man shouldn't be in there, okay? Anyway, sorry, carry on.
I don't think it's something anybody really wants to see.
Oh, God.
If you see it first, it's pretty off-putting. But anyway, you know, great. In any event, so lots of you know, you learn, I think, a valuable lesson, and it's something that helped me as National Commissioner, was being taught how to be empathetic rather than absorbing other people's suffering. You know, you can be overwhelmed by other people's suffering, and you certainly see it enough in hospital, but you're sort of trained to, and if you're going to survive that world, you learn to have empathy without becoming a part of, you know, internalizing that suffering. Although, you know, as I say, some of it, I think the ECG treatment, for example, as I've just said, really did stick in my mind a bit. And they used to be a bit nasty as well when they were doing. So because I was Catholic, I said, well, I won't take part in the abortions. You know, and that was mainly, that was sort of also partly because, you know, my mother was quite, you know, oh no, don't abortion. So okay, well, I won't take part in the abortions. But they used to do the abortions, and then they used to give us the jar to empty it out down the sluice. So that was how they sort of got their own back, because the Catholic girls wouldn't go into the theatre and scrub and participate in the abortions. They made us empty the jar down the sluice. So that was sort of.
I'm just about to pass out.
No. Bernadette, I'm just thinking a little bit about the time that's passing, and I could listen to you for hours, but at this stage, you're still in England, in London.
That's right.
Yeah?
So
how do you end up in
joined
Australia? And I'm not trying to rush you, but you probably have an awful lot to tell us. Australia becoming a brigadier in the army, etc., etc. You know.
Sure. I'll scamper on. So I joined the Territorial Army. I was commissioned into Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps, and then I came over. So then I did my general nursing training. Then I did ophthalmics at Moorfields, and the director of nursing at Moorfields said, "Oh, you know, you're actually not as dumb as you think you are. Why don't you go to university?" So I thought, well, that seems like a nice idea. I'll have a go at that. I'm not really believing I would. I applied for University College London, and I got in, and I studied anthropology. I really enjoyed anthropology. I thought I might go back to nursing after that, but once I got into academia, I really enjoyed it and decided that was I probably wasn't going to go back to nursing. So I called the nursing my 5 gap years. And at the end of my anthropology degree, there are not that many jobs in anthropology. So I was looking around, and a friend said, "Why don't you try law?" So I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. So I did postgrad law, and then went to the Inns of Court School of Law to qualify as a barrister. While I was still at the end of doing my postgrad law, a friend of mine so by this stage I'd stopped being in the Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps, and I'd transferred to Royal Signals. I'd retrained as a signaller in the Territorial Army. And he won a ticket. Well, in fact, his brother on the 23rd of April 1991, every flight on British Airways was free in order to celebrate St. George's Day. And there was a ballot, and John, my friend, his brother, won 4 tickets in that ballot. So he had one, he gave one to his parents, he gave one to his sister, and he gave one to John. And John said, "I've got these tickets." So they were double tickets for each one. "I've got these tickets. In the draw, we've got Melbourne. Do you want to come to Melbourne?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I want to come to Melbourne. Let's do that." Anyway, so I had a pen pal in Brisbane at the time, somebody I'd met in London, and she'd gone back to Brisbane. So I hop on the plane with him, and of course, because we're POMs and we have, you know, socks and sandals and our t-shirts tucked into our jeans, we hire a car, and we have, you know, big, small map, large hands, and we said, "Yeah, we'll drive to Brisbane," because the deal was, you know, he had the tickets, I had the accommodation. So we hopped in the car, and we started driving and driving and driving and driving, and we're like, this country's so big.
A long drive.
And our eyeballs are falling out. And in the end, we said, right, we're going to have to stop. But we'd got to Sydney at this stage. So I'd never forget it. We stay in this little place in Pitt Street, and it was $10 a night for the pair of us. So we shared this really rickety bed. And you know, with the bleats outside. And this is the first time in my life I had heard rain on a tin roof. And I thought we were under fire. was like we were nearly out of the bed and under it to, what is this noise? Because it's a truly Australian thing, rain on the tin roof. And let me say that particular place in Pitt Street did not have an insulated roof. It was like really, really loud. It was just like gunfire. But anyway, that was my sort of anyway. The next day we hopped in the car and carried on and drove to Brisbane and had a wonderful time. But I refused to drive back again, so we flew back to Melbourne and then out back to the UK. But I fell in love with the place. So we got back from that trip, and I was a student. My money was coming through. I was in the Territorial Army that was paying for me for my pocket money, and so I went straight back into the travel agent the day I landed. Straight back in the travel agent, whacked down my almost maxed out credit card and maxed it out to the full for a flight back, and I came back for 3 months. I just don't know if it was a love affair. It was like I was always meant to be here. And in fact, my great uncle had been the first to try and settle in Deniliquin and unfortunately he'd drowned. He was supposed to, come over here and make the big life, but he'd drowned. So really that was my love affair. I finished my training as a barrister, practiced for a year as a barrister, and then I was mad keen to get back over here. So basically hopped on a plane, came back intending to work for a few years, and here I still am. I got a job in Crown Law, and then my qualifications got recognised over here. I worked for a while. I did a year as the two of us from Crown Law were seconded over to the AFP, the Queensland, and we worked. I worked for a couple of years at Queensland Police Headquarters. Meanwhile, I transferred over to the Army Reserve, and then in '96, I transferred from Royal Australian Signals Corps as a reservist into the regular army on a 5-year short service commission as a legal officer. So I did 5 years in the regular army, well, nearly 6 years actually in the regular army as a legal officer, and deployed to East Timor. And that, I think, is where I really hit moral injury, it full in the face. It wasn't the danger as such. So, so I arrived in January 2000. Most of the sort of the really tense stuff had sort of passed, but we were still in Interfet. General Cosgrove was still our leader. He was magnificent. We would have followed him anywhere. And the things that really got me, there were two particular locations that really got me. One was going down to Ballaba, I think it was, where they'd been building a cathedral, and the militia had got the nuns and priests, and they'd taken them up to the top window of this, and they'd pushed them out of the window, and then they'd shot them as they were falling to the ground. And when I was there were still remnants of these people, where bits of their skin and bone there, and that really, I think that really sort of moral injury. That was pretty full on. And then there's another time when I was, you just, everything was flattened. Everything. I mean, it's incredible. It's difficult to describe how that affects you. I mean, people had done this, and there was everywhere you looked. I remember going up onto a high point and looking out, and this city was just roofless. It was just devastated, and people had done this. It wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't an earthquake. People had done this. This devastation. And then there were these people, and I remember this family, and it was in the centre of Dili, and there were sort of 4 brick pillars remaining. That was all there was left of their house. I assume it was their house or a house, a building. And they'd gone and scavenged some tin, and it was raining. It's the tropics, and it was coming down. And there was this family, presumably mother, father, and a couple of kids, all just huddled under this tin, and that really knocked me. That really knocked me. And I had a bit of a bad time when I came back from East Timor. It wasn't it wasn't sort of the danger. It wasn't. I know there was a bit of danger. I mean, one of the guys from one of our units died from dengue fever, and that was traumatic for everybody, you know. And there were sort of riots and machete attacks, and you know, all of that was there. It was dangerous, but that wasn't the issue. It was what had happened to the people, and seeing, and that for me, that is my I mean, I can identify that in my childhood there was moral injury, but that was the really difficult one for me. And I came back very different. I changed. I wasn't right. You know, I had all of those things that I later heard people describe. You know, I was dislocated. I couldn't feel like I fitted in.
How, if you don't mind me asking, Doctor, how deep were you in the hole? Did you think about leaving the world, or what was your, how deep did you go into it?
I went in, well, it's sort of, it got compounded because my grandmother died, and I wasn't being treated right at work either, and so there's some other things and some that were sort of all related together. And in there, and that was it. I cracked in that I resigned. I resigned from I needed to. I was depressed, clinically depressed. They sent me off to a psychiatrist, and I got. I was up in Darwin. My support networks were all in Sydney. You know, my rental a house that I'd bought when I was posted in Albury Wodonga, and I'd rented out because I'd been posted away. My tenant managed to burn it down. My grandmother died. The relationship I was in at the time sort of fell over. And then I'd come back from East Timor with all of these, my head's not right. All happened at once. And I asked for help from the system. And the system said, no, just carry on. I said, look, I need to be posted back to Sydney. I'm not coping here because of all these other things that's happening. And then I got diagnosed with reactive depression. And they said, no, you've got to stay there. You've got to stay there, you know. And I said, but hang on, well, all right, give me leave without pay, you know. And they said, no, you've just got to stay there. And I'm like, right. And you stop thinking rationally. You don't think rationally. And I couldn't tell anybody what was happening to me, and I couldn't explain. And it's weird. It's this thing where you just can't talk about it. And the thing that cures you, that helps you, is talking about it, but you can't talk about it. You stop being able to think properly. Your vision becomes really tunneled. And I understand how you step over that line to suicide. I understand it completely, because when you're there, when you're in that space that's this big, this is all you can see of the world. All sorts of things happen in your head. And I remember going to the movies. So some friends were like, come on, get out of this, you know, let's go to the movies. And I went to the movies, and for the first time and only time, I have to say, I'm pleased to say, in my life, you know, this is 2001, I had a panic attack. And it's the weirdest thing. It was an action movie, and you know action movies, and the people are doing all sorts of things, and they're completely unbelievable. You know, in real life they couldn't do them, of course not. But it's the action movie, and that's the whole fun of them. And my head was going bang, because I can't do that. I can't do those things. I can't do those things. Of course I couldn't. Nobody can. And you know that when you go to the movies, you know, you can't do the things that happen in the movies because they're not real. But this thing happened in my head where I was having this panic attack because I couldn't do those things. You know, and you know, I was a big tough paratrooper. You know, I have I managed to pass paratroop school where some blokes didn't. As a 35-year-old woman, I passed it. But I was having this panic attack because I couldn't do these crazy, stupid things that I was seeing on the screen. So I get it when people say, about suicide. And I haven't really, to be fair, I haven't really shared this with anybody else before. So putting this out on the public mat, I guess, is a bit dangerous for me. But I get it. I understand it. I have lived that experience, or one of those experiences, because I think that, and this is the whole point, and this is another thing, is why the issue of suicide and moral injury is a wicked problem. It's complicated and it's complex because not everybody has the same experience. But this is my experience, and this is where I got to. And it was a combination of that, of those moral issues and grief, but this heady mix of seeing this devastation, of experiencing this grief, and then being treated so unjustly and so wrongly by a system that I believed in, that I wanted to, that was my life, broke me. So I sat on the couch for
if I can let Leo in, Leo in there, because I know what you're going to say, Judy.
Marty and I know each other very well. Bernadette, so many things are running through my mind listening to you. For the want of a better expression, you've certainly been through the mill. Okay. I have to say, I admire you the way you explain all this, and the strength that you have to have in you to, let's say, be still here and able to function, and so on and so forth. This thing of, remember our colleague Miranda said about betrayal? Remember?
Yes.
Well, after identifying it there, we've identified it, Marty and I. I know it from the Irish Army. Another one of your colonels retired from the Australian Army said exactly the same thing to us about 2 years ago, betrayal by a higher authority, and so on, so forth. Okay, there's just I'd like to hear more about what you're doing now. But before that, can I ask you make a point and ask a few questions? You validated what Marty and I have been talking about for a long time about the transgenerational effect from your grandfather to your father and so on. And you're just saying, you're basically saying we were right as well. We are right when we're saying these things because it is transgenerational effect. And we, absolutely, our side, the Jadaville side, we have seen it gone down to grandchildren. Okay. The way you've described your youth and everything, and you didn't understand, you didn't know about moral injury, probably only until the last number of years. But I'm asking you a question now, and I know where it is in my case, in Marty's case, because and so on. Now that you understand moral injury, and now that you can recognize that apart from post-traumatic stress, as you've said, your grandfather, your father, etc., for various reasons, they were suffering moral injury. Now that you understand what they suffer, do you feel within you a sense of forgiveness for them and understanding?
Yes, I do. Yes,
okay.
I think. I mean, I still think people
if that's the case, sorry, I beg your pardon, Bernadette. If that's the case, then, and I'm glad you're saying that because it validates what this Moral Injury International is trying to do, is to raise the awareness so people can understand and forgive. That's just two of the things that we want. So anyway, I see you nodding your head. I'm glad we're on the same wavelength with this. So definitely, if you'd like to tell us more about what you're doing now, etc., from all your experiences, what you're doing now, helping people, etc.
All right. Thanks. I suppose so. I guess just to briefly jump over, just to say that I spent 3 months sort of staring at a wall for a bit. My friends helped me. I developed strategies to sort of get back on my feet. Studying was one of them. My PhD basically grew out of. It was therapeutic for me to do that. Got me back on my feet. Working. I'd lost the regular army, which I'd really. It was a big tear for me. But I continued in the Army Reserve, and as you've alluded to, I continued through the ranks. I went to places like Iraq and Afghanistan as a reservist on full-time service, and eventually landed up as a brigadier and retired from there, basically because at the same time I was moving through my legal career as a barrister. Then I was appointed as a magistrate. I worked with Aboriginal people on circle sentencing and developed some different ways of approaching how we do that, because there's a lot of, I mean, the trauma in that community is just a whole PhD thesis. But I got offered the opportunity to become the National Commissioner for Defence and Veteran Suicide Prevention, and I absolutely jumped at it. So I basically gave up my career as a magistrate. So I could have been a magistrate till I was 70. I could have sat till I was 70. But I was offered this opportunity to, and again, it was because service is incredibly important to me. And being a veteran is incredibly important to me. And, caring for people is incredibly important to me. And this opportunity allowed me to do all of that. So I was really keen to do. So 2020, I was. I don't know what the process was. There was some media criticism about how the process. I don't know what the process was for my selection. I really genuinely have no idea. All I know is I got a call from the Attorney General offering me this opportunity, and he explained that it would be about trying to reduce suicide within the veteran community, the defence and veteran community. And it was everything that is about me, to address this problem, to really make a difference. I just want to make a difference, and to make a difference in this community for defence members, for veterans, and for their families, because as I've described, I am, my early life was the product of somebody who went out there and fought in the worst war we had ever. I mean, the First World War, in terms of its brutality and the mechanization and industrialization of war, has still is for all the terrors that we see daily on our TV screens, is still the worst meat mincer that we've seen. And I am the echo of that war still. Just as Leo, you've described, you've inherited from your father, and I've inherited from my grandfather through my father, all of those things. So to actually be able to make a difference, and because you really are the first people who know about the fact that I had that experience that brought me to the brink, and I have an understand. I feel I have an understanding. And when Nikki Jameson's talking about moral injury, I understand it. I don't need to articulate it as well. I wish I could articulate it as well as she does, but I understand exactly what's being described here, because I've had my own taste of it, and I think there is. One can argue about whether a human being has the right to choose whether they end their life. That's not the argument here. The issue here is, in my view, nobody should feel to get to that point where taking their life is their only viable option, because where it's preventable, where it's from pain. And we know from the studies that the same areas light up in our brain when we are suffering from emotional pain as physical pain. So we know that. But people should not, because of that pain should not, that hopelessness, that void, should not be the reason they take their life. I remember on the news quite a few years ago now, a gentleman had lived to 114 years of age. All his friends were dead. He was ready to die, and he just wasn't dying. He was 114 and just not dying. So he paid his ticket and he went over to Switzerland, I think it was, and chose to finish his life. That's a choice. That's a rational choice made for reasons. There are people who are suffering from terminal illnesses who choose, and I've seen people dying horribly, and I understand that choice. Those are not the choices we're talking about here. This is the choice that people make when really their capacity to make that choice is non-existent or severely affected. They're not really in the right place to be making that sort of choice. They're driven to it by their pain. I'll describe it as pain because I think we can all understand pain. Nobody should take their life because of that type of pain where it's preventable and curable. And we can do things to stop people getting there, to take them off that path. And there's some low-hanging fruit that we can deal with. I mean, there's 122 recommendations of the Royal Commission. My report, similarly, the recommendations in there. I was really pleased with the generosity of the Royal Commission in that they recognised my report when they started, and Nick Caldas, when he closed, the Royal Commission also recognised my report as the foundation for their work. And there is so much to do. It's frustrating that I've had to sit on the sidelines twiddling my thumbs for the last 4 years while that process goes through, because we could be doing things. So what I'm doing now is, so I do some part-time teaching. I'm an adjunct professor, and I do some work in the law space with teaching law graduates. And I maintain my commitment and interest in this space. I work with Ben Wadhams at Flinders University, the Open Door Project. Continuing, we've got to have evidence-based here. I have a feeling based on my experience, but that is not what is going to drive change. What's going to drive change is the academic investigation, the evidence, the sum of lived experience, not an individual lived experience, the sum of lived experience of people and their families. And we know, speaking to people who have experienced it here with you guys, how that moral injury permeates through the family as well. There are injustices in the system that send people off. As National Commissioner, I listened to Interim National Commissioner. My legislation never went through, but I listened to the stories of people who, complained about something that wasn't right, and they could see that it wasn't right. And then the system, instead of saying that's not right, obfuscated and gaslighted and blamed and suppressed and drove people off a cliff, just drove them off the cliff. It's not, and I don't blame. Blame is the wrong word. I withdraw that. Not blame. I'm not saying that defence is just bad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there are things, there are structural things and issues within defence that can be corrected to improve the situation. There are individuals who do the wrong thing, and there needs to be some way of identifying that, because in a hierarchical organisation like defence, it's too easy for somebody at a rank level to block and to do the wrong thing with impunity,
Yes.
invisibly.
Yes.
And that's a big problem that we need to find a solution to.
And Leo, just what Bernadette's saying there, Leo, if I can bring you in, and just for our listeners all over the world, you're talking about the Australian Army, everything. It's very similar to what you were saying, is what Jaredville is about, and people know the
Yeah.
movie, The Siege of Jaredville. So, Lee, I'll pass over to you.
Yeah,
I know you're picking up there. I can see your head
yeah,
moving.
I am. Yes, I hate to say it, but Marty and I think alike. Sorry, Marty.
That's your
No,
problem.
yeah, I know. True, true, true. No, it's a very serious subject. I shouldn't be laughing or making jokes, but Bernadette, what you have described is what Marty and I have discovered over the last 4 years of interviewing people. It's the same in every walk of life where moral injury exists. Now, we're tonight talking about the military defense, as you call it, and it's the same in Ireland in the Defence Department of Defence. It's the same in America, and I'm very close to veterans associations in the United States. There's no duty of care, betrayal by higher authority, thrown on the scrap heap, no, and the same. But that's defence. But we also know it's the same in the health service, the same in prison service, it's the same in police forces, it's the same in the corporate sector, where something happens, the powers that be, they turn a blind eye to it, say, go away, don't be crying, don't be worrying all the time. But I've one question. The fact that you were put in a position where to look into and help about the suicides in veterans and the families, etc., does that mean that the Australian authorities are actually trying to do something right in relation to moral injury, albeit
Yes.
it's a slow, ponderous moving machine maybe, but they are actually trying to do something.
Yes, I think both at governmental level, at the senior levels of defence, in veteran affairs, in our very extensive ex-service organisations, everybody, I think there is a universal recognition and commitment to change. The things that we're talking about here are perpetrated by individuals, and there are structures within any organisation. I absolutely agree with you completely, Leo. It is not restricted to defence and the treatment of veterans at all. There are examples of this in many places. But here we're talking about because of the nature of service in the Defence Force, because of its character, it can be amplified, and the effects can be amplified. If you're late for work, you can be charged, and things can happen to you. In the military, if you're late for work in Civvy Street, well, you may lose your job if you keep doing it, but normally, somebody would say, hey, mate, you're late for work, don't do it again. So that's just but one very small example of how different military service is from an ordinary job. But yes, there is a commitment, and I take my hat off to the government for progressing this. And there's legislation has just passed here, I'm not sure if you're aware, to set up a defence and veterans commission to continue to look at this problem, this wicked problem that we have in this space for both veterans, both service people, veterans and their families. And I think that's really important to add, and their families, because we've already discussed and agreed that this is multi-generational. It seeps out into the family, therefore the wider community. So I commend the government. I commend the senior, the hierarchy in both defence and veteran affairs. But this leadership has to be, I suppose, maintained. And the job of the new commissioner, in my view, is very much to keep focus on these issues and to work. They've got to work together. There's no point in setting up oppositions and factions in this business, because if that happens, not going to affect change. Change can only really be effective if you can convince and influence people into understanding and being committed to and focused on changing, so that we change this system so that this doesn't happen, so that we can sort of recognise moral injury. We can take steps to stop It's like work, health, place, and work, health, place, and safety. Workplace health and safety. WHS. It's like that. You know, it becomes a culture. So we 50 years ago, you know, if you'd said, oh, you know, you've got to be careful in your workplace, and, you know, you've got to wear a hat, and all of those things that we do now as second nature, safety, you know, becomes permeated through our workplaces. It's the same with issues like moral injury. You know, well, you know, how do we make sure that our processes, how do we, you know, treat this? How do we recognize something, and how do we put measures in place? It's about that collaboration, about that influence, about that working together. If we say to defence, you're wrong, you're bad, that is, firstly, I don't believe that's true. And secondly, it's the effect that it's going to have is basically it's going to blow the whole thing up. It's just not going to work. You just get people's back up. They're not going to work with you, and it's all going to fall over. We have to be able to work.
Yeah. Sorry, Bernadette. It's interesting you made something you said there kind of rings a bell with me. You said that it can fall to an individual. One individual can affect it. One individual can block it. So you might have the, let's say, the higher authorities might want to do something, but one single person, if he or she has the rank or the position, can put a stop to all that you're trying to do. And I would hazard a guess that that's the same in all walks of life, and in every other nationality, every other country as well. Just a point I'd like to make with a wider audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, guys, we're just out of time. I could honestly, if this one doesn't stop ringing me, that's the kids looking for the lunch, the breakfast to make. I'm just kidding. You know what? Just talking to you, and I've had the pleasure, but like Leo, I got to know you, and you're an amazing woman. I'm in awe of what you do, and listen to your story there with your new son. You're an inspiration, and I'm picking up everything you're putting down, and I just honestly can't thank you enough. And I let Leo finish with it. We're going to put up some at the end here. I want to put up some pictures that you sent me, family pictures, and you in your uniform and that. We put a couple up at the start of it. And I wish I had another 5 shows, but we'll certainly stay in touch and work together. And I'm going to let Leo finish. And then if you can just, before Leo finishes off at the end of it, can you just give a little inspiration to, and I'm talking particularly women out there and vets of all, and you said something very important that nailed it for me there. It's not just about whether it's the army or whether it's the police or whatever, nurses. It's about the families, because they live it at the same time.
Absolutely, they do. Yeah. Absolutely, the families live it, and I think that's it's an area I believe has almost been invisible in the past. I think it's only in, I wouldn't want to quantify it, but certainly when I joined the Territorial Army in 1985, the families were kind of, well, yes, they were the baggage that came too. They weren't really considered. It was just all about the service person. Everything was just about the service person, and the families were almost like a nuisance. Yeah. I think that's changed. I think that's not the case now. The families are coming more and more into focus, and I think that we really are understanding. We as a community. I'm not talking about we in any other sense, but we as a community are realizing more and more the importance of the family. And there's a lot of work being done now for the Vietnam vets and their children and grandchildren. And that's, we're finally recognizing as a community, and a lot of that is the moral injury that's come through. And really, I think this is a breakthrough. It's like discovering penicillin, that we've managed now to understand the separation between PTSD and moral injury. Because if it's like anything, I've got a cold, or I've got a chest infection, and you treat it like it's a burn. If you apply the wrong medicine, not only can it not do good, it could do harm. And we can only benefit by now this new recognition and understanding of this quite different, the quite different positions of PTSD and moral injury, and also sort of combinations of moral injury and PTSD. The next steps, of course, now are really identifying how we treat those injuries.
Leo,
Okay.
last word for you, my friend.
Yeah, Bernadette, I could listen to you for hours, and on that note, I hope that we'll be able to talk to you again and have more podcasts with you, because you've an awful lot you can tell us, you can teach us an awful lot. Just to finish up, can I say that I know I'm speaking for Marty as well. It's been a privilege to listen to you, absolute privilege. You're quite an amazing lady. You have some inner strength that I really envy. And I wish you all the best in all your endeavors. And again, it's been an honor to talk with you and to listen to you. And you take care. God bless you.
That's very generous. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Dr. Bernadette, the pleasure was all ours. And I would like to thank our listeners here in Australia, Ireland, and all over the world. And you can stay on just after this and have a look at some photographs from Dr. Bernadette. Thank you. Leo, always a pleasure.
Take care. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, and we'll see you on the next episode. Go to moralinjuryinternational.com to watch this podcast. moralinjuryinternational.com. Good night. Cheerio.